welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History. I'm Claire Ridgway. I'm the author of On This Day in Tudor History, as well as a few other Tudor history books, and I also run the Anne Boleyn Files and Tudor Society websites. Now, today I'm taking you back to Henry VIII's reign. On this day in Tudor history, Saturday the 31st of May, 1533, the eve of her coronation, a rather pregnant Queen Anne Boleyn processed from the Tower of London, where she'd stayed the night, to Westminster Hall in preparation for her coronation the following day. Now, this coronation procession must have been an absolutely amazing, wonderful sight for the citizens of London. And it's something that if I had a TARDIS, then I'd definitely go back in time for, as long as I knew that I could get safely back to the present day. Now, not only was this a huge procession of people dressed in their finery and horses beautifully decorated in lavish trappings, but there were stops for pageants on the way. Pageants, orations, music, and also free wine flowing at a special wine fountain, or flowing in the conduits, such as the conduit in Fleet Street. So it was an amazing day of lots of pageantry and entertainment, and thankfully stops for pageants for Anne Boleyn to just sort of catch her breath and to just enjoy things. And as well as the procession of people and all this lavish entertainment, there was England's new queen, Anne Boleyn, under a canopy of cloth of gold, which was decorated with gilt statues and silver bells and carried by the barons of the Cinque Ports. There was this new queen, King Henry VIII's second wife, Queen Anne, with her hair loose and flowing, as was the way with the coronation of a queen. She was wearing a surcoat of white cloth of gold, an ermine-trimmed mantle of matching cloth of gold, and then a coif with a circlet of rich stones. I mean, she must have looked absolutely stunning. Just ahead of Queen Anne was a huge procession that was led by servants of Jean de Danteville, the French ambassador. They were followed by gentlemen, squires and knights. Then you had the judges, then the Knights of the Bath, who were dressed in ermine-trimmed violet gowns and hoods. Next were abbots, barons, bishops, earls, marquises, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Venetian ambassador, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the French ambassador, the Mayor of London, William Howard as Deputy Earl Marshal, who was acting in that role for his brother Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk. There was Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, acting as Constable of England. There were lots and lots of people. It was a huge procession. And just ahead of Anne were her Chancellor and sergeants and officers of arms. Now, the procession didn't end there. You then got a huge procession behind the Queen. Behind her walked her Chamberlain, Lord Borough, and her Master of the Horses, William Coffin. Then her ladies, clothed in crimson velvet and cloth of gold and tissue. Then chariots carrying the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk and the Marchioness of Dorset, or possibly Anne's mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, along with other ladies of the court. So this was huge. It must have taken ages for this procession to actually make its way through the streets of London. I just don't know in measurement how long this procession of all these people was. Now, the procession's route through the City of London included Fenchurch Street, Gracechurch Street and Leadenhall, Cornhill Street, Poultry, Cheapside, St Paul's Cathedral, of course being Old St Paul's Cathedral, St Paul's Churchyard, Ludgate, Fleet Street, Temple Bar, and then probably the Strand, the present day Trafalgar Square, Whitehall, and finally Westminster Hall. And this is a route that sort of still exists today, and something that you can actually do yourself. If you want to walk Anne Boleyn's Coronation route, you can do it through the streets of London. Something that I really want to do. I've been to various landmarks on the route, but I've never actually walked the route, and I'd love to do that one day. Now, as I said, there were various stops on the route where Anne could just pause a while and view pageants and entertainment and listen to verses being read, listen to singing and music. Chronicler Edward Hall, who's one of my favourite primary sources, and a pamphlet, The Noble Triumphant Coronation of Queen Anne from 1533, give details, like really, really detailed records of the entertainment that day. So let me just share with you a sort of overview of what Anne saw on that day. At Fenchurch Street, there was a pageant featuring children dressed as merchants who welcomed their new queen into the city with orations in French and English. Then, at Gracechurch Street, Anne was greeted with a pageant that had been designed by Hans Holbein the Younger. This pageant featured Apollo with the 9 muses on Mount Parnassus. They greeted their queen with what is described as many goodly verses to her great praise and honour. A wine fountain also ran there. Then at Leadenhall we have 2 pageants. The first one had Anne Boleyn's falcon badge as its theme. It had a castle with a green. It had a root or stump out of which white and red roses spilled. There was a white falcon which descended from heaven and landed on this stump. Then an angel wearing armour descended and crowned this white falcon. Then the second pageant consisted of Saint Anne, surrounded by her children, the 3 Marys, and their children. Here verses were read to Queen Anne, poetry which emphasised England's hope for her as queen and hope for the child that she was carrying. So the spilling of those white and red roses, like the Tudor sort of roses, and then Saint Anne were all to do with, Anne being pregnant and carrying the heir to the throne. Then we have Cornhill Street. At the Conduit on Cornhill Street, there was a pageant featuring the 3 Graces. A poet greeted the Queen with a poem declaring the nature of these 3 ladies and giving high praises unto the Queen's grace. Now, chronicler Edward Hall describes how there was also the spring of grace continually running wine. So another lot of wine for people to enjoy. Then at Cheapside at the Great Conduit, which was newly painted with arms and devices, there was a costly fountain, another wine fountain, which ran white wine, claret and red great plenty all that afternoon. That's how it's described. And there was great melody with speeches. So wine is definitely a theme. They knew how to enjoy themselves at these pageants. At Cheapside Cross, which had been newly garnished, Anne met the alderman and the recorder of London, who welcomed their queen formally into the city and gave her a gold purse which contained 1,000 marks in gold on behalf of the city. Then at the Lesser Conduit, there was a pageant of the Judgment of Paris. Anne was given a ball of gold, the golden apple which Paris grants to Venus in the story, but which in this pageant he granted to Queen Anne instead because of her beauty and her grace. Verses of great honour were also said, along with children singing a ballad in praise of the Queen and her ladies. Then, and there's more, at St. Paul's Cathedral there was a proper and a sumptuous pageant, with virgins sitting under words in Latin, which when translated go to Queen Anne, prosper, proceed and reign. There were other messages on the pageant, such as, come my love, thou shalt be crowned. Lord God, direct my ways. trust in God. And then, Queen Anne, when you shalt bear a new son of the king's blood, there shall be a golden world unto thy people. So lots of verses, lots of messages in praise of the new queen and the child that she was carrying. The ladies in the pageant then threw wafers and rose leaves, and on the wafers were verses written in gold. At St. Paul's churchyard there was a scaffold on which there were 200 well-dressed school children who greeted Queen Anne with poems in hers and the king's honour. At St. Martin's Church at Ludgate, a choir of men and children stood on the leads of the church roof and sang new ballads made in praise of her. Then, as the procession continued on, at Fleet Street, the conduit had been freshly painted and there was a pageant featuring a tower with 4 turrets. From each turret, a cardinal virtue spoke to the Queen, promising that they would never leave her and that they would aid and comfort her. There were also musical instruments making a heavenly noise, and the conduit there ran red wine and claret all afternoon. At Temple Bar, which had also been newly painted, there was a choir of men and children singing to the Queen. After that final pageant, and can you imagine how long that might have taken to make your way through the streets of London with that huge procession, pausing at each of those pageants and enjoying the entertainment. But finally, Queen Anne then made her way via Charing Cross to Westminster Hall, which was described by Edward Hall as newly glazed, so new windows, and decorated with cloth of arras. There Anne enjoyed refreshments such as spice plates, hippocras and wine, which she shared with her ladies who were attending her. Anne then gave thanks to the lords, ladies and mayor and retired for the night. Both Edward Hall and the pamphlet about her coronation record that Anne was then actually taken secretly to spend the night with the king at his Manor of Westminster. I can't quite imagine how tired Anne must have felt after that procession and all that entertainment and being heavily pregnant. But hopefully she managed to get some rest, some shut-eye, before, of course, her coronation the next day, which would be a very, very long day for her. So that's what happened on this day in history, the 31st of May, 1533, the coronation procession of Queen Anne Boleyn through the streets of the City of London. Now, I'll be back tomorrow, and I think I might be telling you about Queen Anne's coronation, so you'll find out more about it tomorrow. See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.